Okay, imagine this. A time when trying to turn lead into gold wasn't, just some fantasy, but actually seen as a serious science.
Right, and with implications that went way beyond just making money.
Exactly. The image we have is often just the gold part, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah.
But historically, alchemy was, well, much bigger. It explored transformation on lots of levels, physical, sure, but also intellectual, spiritual.
And that spiritual side is exactly what we're diving into today. We're looking at how alchemy and spirituality connect through a really key figure in medieval Islamic mysticism, Ibn Arabi.
hmm Specifically, we're looking at a chapter from his huge work, the Al-Futud al-Makkiyah, or the Meccan Illuminations.
And this chapter is called The Alchemy of Human Happiness. Quite a title.
It is, and interestingly, it's designated as a whole part of the larger work, which is unusual.
So tell us a bit about Ibn Arabi himself. He lived when?
12th and 13th centuries, and he was, a towering figure, known as Muhyi al-Din, the reviver of religion, and also al-Sheikh al-Akbar, the greatest spiritual master. His ideas about reality, spiritual growth, they still resonate very strongly today.
So for this deep dive, maybe forget the bubbling beakers and secret formulas for a moment.
Yes. We're unpacking Ibn Arabi's alchemical view, which is deeply symbolic. It's about inner transformation, personal development, really.
And getting a richer understanding of reality itself, we'll also look at how his ideas fit into the bigger picture of alchemy through history.
Exactly. It's a fascinating blend.
All right, let's get into it. Now, understanding Ibn Arabi means getting to grips with the language, right? Arabic is quite different from English.
It really is. Arabic works with root systems. A three-letter root, like K-A-A-L-M, can generate words related to speaking, speech, words, but also wounding.
Wounding, how does that connect?
Well, think about how words can injure, but also how they can teach or convey meaning. There's an inherent connection in the language itself. Or ro, which links spirit, breath, gentle movement, refreshment.
So one root holds a whole cluster of related meanings.
Precisely. And that richness, that layered meaning, is hard to capture perfectly in translation. English builds words differently, often from Latin or Greek origins.
That makes sense. So translators have a tough job.
They do. Plus, medieval Arabic didn't use punctuation like we do, so you're interpreting sentence structure, flow, even plurals and articles don't always map one-to-one.
And what about things like pronouns? God is often he in translations.
Yes, Arabic uses huwa, typically translated as he for the divine essence or ipseity. But Ibn Arabi himself was actually very sensitive to gender nuances. He sometimes uses feminine imagery or emphasizes feminine aspects of the divine. So translators have to make choices there too.
It's a lot to juggle, and then there's the actual alchemical jargon on top of that.
Absolutely. Medieval alchemical terms can be, well, pretty obscure today.
I bet.
Thankfully, the translation we're drawing on has really helpful footnotes. They explain Quranic references, define terms, and show how Ibn Arabi uses certain concepts elsewhere in his writings.
That's crucial. Okay, so with that linguistic context, let's zoom out. Alchemy itself, where did the tradition believe it came from?
The dominant idea for centuries was that it was founded by Hermes Trismegistus.
Hermes Trismegistus, the thrice greatest Hermes. Sounds impressive.
He's this fascinating figure, a blend of the Egyptian god Thoth.
The god of wisdom and writing.
That's the one. Blended with the Greek god Hermes. He was seen as this ancient source of all knowledge, science, religion, magic, philosophy.
So thrice greatest, what did that mean? Did it refer to three different people?
Well, the interpretations varied over time. Some accounts talked about three distinct Hermeses across history. One before the flood, maybe the prophet Idris who built the pyramids.
Right.
Then one after the flood in Babylon who revived knowledge. And a later Egyptian one focused on alchemy itself. A writer called Ibn al-Nadim, around the 10th century, actually credited the Babylonian one with starting alchemy.
Interesting. So the lineage was a bit fluid.
Yes. And later, the idea that the prophet Idris was Hermes became quite common. And Trismegistus came to mean he was a prophet, a king, and a sage, who also, crucially, knew the secret of transmuting metals.
So Ibn Arabi was tapping into a really old, complex tradition.
Definitely. And many themes he explores, the spiritual ascent, transformation, were also found in Neoplatonist, Gnostic circles, and Hermetic philosophy.
But his approach was different.
Yes, their focus tended to be more on a kind of intelligible hierarchy of celestial beings, angels, that sort of thing. Ibn Arabi's focus is arguably more centered on the inner experience and the nature of divine reality itself.
It feels like alchemy meant something quite different back then. It wasn't just seen as primitive chemistry.
Not at all. It held a much deeper significance. That changed significantly, though, particularly in the 19th century with the invention of electroplating.
Electroplating. How did that affect things?
Well, suddenly you could easily make things look like gold or silver.
Yeah.
Sort of demystified gold.
Ah, it made it mundane.
Exactly. Gold became more a quantifiable commodity, losing some of that symbolic weight, that connection to perfection. And chemistry, of course, emerged as the dominant science explaining matter. Alchemy started to look, quaint or misguided.
Okay, so before Ibn Arabi really spiritualized it, what were the core ideas about how alchemy worked physically?
The cornerstone was the belief that all metals were formed from two primary principles: sulfur and quicksilver.
Or mercury?
Sulfur and quicksilver.
Well, sulfur was seen as the masculine principle, hot, dry, active, dissolving. It provided the life, or form. Quicksilver was the feminine, cold, moist, volatile, passive. It provided the substance, or primordial matter.
Like a yin and yang for metals.
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah.
Fundamental duality. They believed metals naturally grew or matured in the earth, slowly transforming towards the most perfect state, which was gold.
So mining was like,
Harvesting?
almost like natural obstetrics, as one scholar put it, taking the metal baby before it was fully cooked into gold.
Huh, okay. And the alchemist's goal was to speed that up.
Precisely. Using a catalyst, the famous elixir, or philosopher's stone, elixir in Arabic, a jar of falasifa.
The philosopher's stone.
Right. And there were generally thought to be two main types: a white elixir for making silver, associated with the moon,
Okay.
and a red elixir for making gold, associated with the sun. The ultimate goal.
And how did they think the elixir worked?
Well, someone like Jabir ibn Ayyan, a major figure in the 8th century, theorized that metals were composed of the four elements earth, air, fire, water in different proportions. The elixir was thought to rearrange these proportions perfectly.
I see. A rebalancing act.
Exactly. And importantly, that red elixir, sometimes called red sulfur, also took on this powerful symbolic meaning.
Which was?
It came to represent the transformative action of a true spiritual guide or master, someone who could help transform a person's inner state, their soul.
Ah, so the link to spiritual change was already there.
Yes. Ibn Arabi himself uses terms like revered stone and red sulfur in his earlier works to talk about this potent spiritual agency. And interestingly, he himself later became known by the title, the Red Sulfur.
Wow. So he embodied that transformative principle. Now, this is where it gets really interesting. How does Ibn Arabi take these established alchemical ideas and, well, pivot them?
He decisively shifts the focus away from the practical laboratory details. For him, alchemy becomes a map for the inner journey, the mystical ascent, the mirage, and spiritual realization.
So it's about the soul's transformation, not metals.
Entirely. His emphasis is on marifa.
Marifa, what's that exactly?
It's usually translated as gnosis or experiential knowledge. It's not just intellectual understanding like reading a book. It's a direct knowing, perceived in the heart. Deep, intuitive, lived understanding.
Like the difference between reading about swimming and actually jumping in the water.
That's a great analogy. Exactly. Is knowledge gained through direct experience of reality.
Okay, so how does he illustrate this in The Alchemy of Human Happiness?
A central element is this allegory of two travelers journeying together. One is called the follower, sometimes translated as imitator, and the other is the rational thinker.
The follower and the rational thinker. Okay, that sounds like a classic setup. Is it just faith versus reason? Religion versus science?
It's tempting to see it that way, but Ibn Arabi is doing something more subtle, I think. It's not a simple opposition. He seems to be pointing to two fundamental modes within us for how we approach knowledge and reality itself.
Two modes within us. How so?
Think about when you encounter a new idea or experience. One tendency is to try and fit it into what you already know, your existing mental framework. This is kind of the rational thinker mode.
Right, trying to make it make sense based on past experience.
Exactly. The other tendency, the follower mode, is perhaps more about openness, about accepting the new information on its own terms first, trusting the source, even if it doesn't immediately fit. It's about allowing your framework to be changed by the new input.
I can definitely see those two impulses. So it's less about belief systems and more about our internal learning process.
That seems to be the core of it. It's about how we fundamentally orient ourselves toward understanding the self and the world.
Okay. So these two travelers, they go on a journey.
Yes, the chapter describes them ascending through the seven heavens, each associated with a planet and a prophet from the Abrahamic traditions.
And they experience it differently.
Very differently. The rational thinker tends to grasp things only at the level of, say, planetary influences astrology, the science of the stars, as understood then. He's limited by his own framework.
Okay.
The follower, however, learns directly from the prophets they encounter. He receives deeper truths about the nature of reality, experiences profound spiritual states, supreme light, love ecstasy, and comes to understand unity.
So the follower gets the marifa, the experiential knowledge.
Precisely. The journey shows that real spiritual progress, for Ibn Arabi, involves encountering and internalizing divine wisdom revealed through these different levels of being, guided by prophetic insight.
What sort of deeper truths does the follower gain? You mentioned unity.
Yes, realizing the fundamental interconnectedness of everything. The follower comes to see that ultimately the soul perceives God through God, loves God through God, because God is the underlying reality of the lover, the loving, and the beloved.
Wow, that's profound.
It is. Ibn Arabi talks about everyone having a private face turned towards the ultimate source, the single center of being. This is our unique, direct connection. And we also have a shared face towards the world of manifestation, the world we all experience.
Our private face, like our unique perspective or connection point.
Something like that. And he says true knowledge, true education happens via that private face. It's a direct reception.
So if knowledge comes directly through this private face, why the journey through the heavens and meeting the prophets? Doesn't that imply intermediaries?
That's a great question. It seems paradoxical. The follower does receive directly, realizing that all actions are ultimately God's action, freeing them from being bound by secondary causes. But the prophets aren't obstacles. They are like conduits or disseminators of that divine knowledge.
Ah, okay.
Ibn Arabi uses the analogy of one lamp lighting another. The prophets have received this light, this knowledge, and they pass it on, guiding the follower through the stages of understanding. They embody aspects of that total divine knowledge.
That makes sense. It's not bypassing, but guided transmission.
Exactly.
You mentioned earlier that this chapter connects to other parts of his work, the Fuchet.
Yes. For instance, chapter 15 talks about the spiritual breaths and introduces a mysterious teacher figure called the healer of wounds.
The healer of wounds. Intriguing.
Very. Some think this figure might represent Idris or Hermes, and the message this healer brings is transformative, restorative, very alchemical in theme.
And didn't you mention a word connection earlier? Between words and wounds?
Yes, in Arabic, the root KLM gives us kalim, words, and kalam, speech, but also kalm or kalum, wounds. Ibn Arabi plays on this, suggesting words have the power both to wound and to heal, to educate, to reveal hidden meaning, like an alchemical operation on the soul.
That's a powerful linguistic link.
It really is. He also defines the true sage as someone who understands the science of weights and measures.
Which is his term for alchemy.
Yes, in this spiritual context. And the purpose of this science is to restore a person to their finest stature, their original perfect potential, by removing the defects of self-interest or ego.
So alchemy as a way to refine the self back to its essence.
Precisely. There's also the number 36 that pops up. He connects it to 36 different forms or expressions of Tawhid, divine unity. It can be found in the Quran.
Okay.
And also to the 36th surah of the Quran, Yasin, which is considered the heart of the Quran. And even to the numerical value in the Abjad system of the word ilah, meaning a god.
So 36 signifies completeness, a fundamental orientation.
Perhaps a kind of primordial human orientation towards acknowledging and worshiping the one reality. It weaves together unity, scripture, and that basic impulse.
These connections really show how integrated his thought is. Okay, let's walk through that journey through the heavens. What specific lessons does the follower pick up?
Right. So in the first heaven, associated with the moon and presided over by Adam, the follower meets Adam and learns, progressing onwards. The rational thinker, meanwhile, gets stuck on the moon's astronomical knowledge and regrets not having followed the messenger Adam.
So regret for the rationalist early on. What about the second heaven?
Second heaven. Jesus and John the Baptist linked to Mercury. Here, the follower learns about spiritual measure and balance, the mystery of creation symbolized by Jesus reviving the dead, which Ibn Arabi interprets as reviving hearts with knowledge.
Life through knowledge.
Yes. And there's a distinction made here between poetry, which sums things up emotionally, and prose, which differentiates logically. Both have their place.
Interesting distinction. On to the third.
Third heaven, Joseph and Venus. The lesson here is about interpreting meanings, Hidden in images, the science of dream interpretation, which Joseph is known for. The follower learns how reality manifests through forms and images. Even the rational thinker, who is quite distressed by now, gets some of this insight from Venus.
Okay, so meanings embodied in forms. What about the fourth?
Fourth heaven, this is a big one. Idris, who, as we said, identifies with Hermes in the sun. Here, the follower learns about the ultimate perfection embodied in the Prophet Muhammad, the totality of words, and how his message fulfills and abrogates previous laws.
The culmination of prophecy and the rational thinker.
Still veiled, unable to grasp this level of synthesis, he gets the astronomical data from the sun, but misses the deeper meaning Idris conveys.
And the fifth heaven, Mars.
Fifth heaven, yes.
Yeah.
Aaron and Mars. The theme is divine representation, being a Khalifa or steward for God. Aaron's gentleness, even with his brother Moses, and the instruction to speak gently even to Pharaoh, highlights divine mercy and the power of gentle speech.
Even with perceived enemies.
Yes. And by now, the rational thinker is starting to really see his own limitations, his failings.
Okay, progress of a sort for him too. Sixth heaven, Jupiter.
Sixth heaven, Moses and Jupiter. Here, the follower learns about the heart as the visited house, the true sanctuary. Also, the necessity of recognizing the validity in different creeds and spiritual paths as they all ultimately face the same reality. There's guidance from Abraham here about associating with milk brothers.
Milk brother.
Those who share the same source of spiritual nourishment, the milk of divine knowledge, regardless of their outward path.
A beautiful image of shared understanding. And the final heaven.
Seventh heaven, Abraham and Saturn. The follower ascends to the highest station, the litter of divine grace. He recognizes Abraham as the spiritual father of humankind in his devotion, and Muhammad as the father of the heirs, meaning the inheritors of the complete prophetic wisdom.
And the rational thinker at this final stage.
He acknowledges Abraham, the shared ancestor, but he isn't fully recognized by Abraham in the same way the follower is. His knowledge remains incomplete.
So the follower reaches this peak understanding within the planetary heavens. What happens next? Is that the end?
Not quite. The journey continues beyond the planetary spheres. The follower ascends into the realms of the constellations. He understands how paradise originates from the dynamic movement of the zodiac, representing infinite possibilities, and how hell relates to the fixed stars, representing limitation or fixation.
Paradise is dynamic, hell is static.
In a sense. And he sees the creation as continuous, ever new. Paradise isn't a static place, but a constant state of new delight and unfolding realities.
And beyond the stars.
He reaches the realm of the cloud, the Amah, the primordial mystery where creation begins. He witnesses the power of the divine command, be, sees the infinite treasuries of generosity, understands that existence is constantly being renewed by God's attention.
Wow. Deeper and deeper into the source.
Yes. He ascends through various levels associated with the divine names, realizing the utter interconnectedness of everything with God. Previous notions of God being totally separate, transcendent, or identical with creation, immanent, dissolve into a more complex understanding.
What's that understanding?
It's often described as God being both transcendent and immanent, the reality in things, but not limited to things, seeing the one in the many and the many as expressions of the one.
Okay, and then?
He witnesses the preserved tablet, Lamafo, which contains the knowledge of all actions and sciences, the blueprint of creation. And then the supreme pen, Kalam Lafa, which inscribes this knowledge representing the active principle of divine decree, the knowledge of divine friendship, and vice-regency, Khilafa. He understands how things are decreed and that this divine writing is indelible.
So seeing the very process of reality unfolding.
Exactly. The source code, you might say.
This whole journey is just incredible. What's the ultimate point, the final realization for the follower?
It culminates in this intimate, loving, experiential knowledge of God Marifa. It's characterized by overwhelming love and direct witnessing, seeing, as Ibn Arabi puts it, the thing in the things, the single divine reality underlying all diverse forms, and realizing that any sense of separation between the self and God, or between things, is ultimately illusory.
A complete dissolution of separation. Phew. Okay, let's try and wrap this up. Thinking back over this whole deep dive, what are the main takeaways from Ibn Arabi's Alchemy of Human Happiness?
Well, first, I'd say it's his brilliant use of alchemical language as a metaphor. It's not about gold, it's about the inner work, the spiritual refinement needed for growth.
Right, the symbolic transformation.
Second, the contrast between the follower and the rational thinker. It's a really insightful look at different ways of approaching knowledge, highlighting the limits of just relying on your existing intellectual framework.
And the importance of being open, perhaps.
Exactly. Which leads to the third point, the absolute centrality of Marifa, that direct experiential knowing that comes from the heart, from the inner journey itself.
Not just thinking about it, but knowing it.
Yes. And finally, the chapter lays out these stages of ascent, this guided journey through different levels of reality, learning from the prophets who embody aspects of divine wisdom.
It really makes you pause and reflect on your own approach, doesn't it? When you encounter something new, are you more the follower, willing to accept and learn, or the rational thinker trying to analyze it and fit it into what you already know?
It's a great question for self-reflection. Maybe the key is integrating both. Using reason, yes, but also cultivating that openness, that willingness to be transformed by new understanding.
Finding that balance.
Perhaps that's where the real alchemy of human happiness lies. Not in changing lead to gold out there, but in recognizing the potential, the gold, already within us, and engaging in that transformative inner journey.
Or, as Ibn Arabi's work seems to suggest, maybe the most profound knowledge doesn't come just from our intellect, but from cultivating a deeper, more direct, more intimate connection with reality itself. What might that connection look like in your own life?
Something to definitely ponder on.
Indeed. Well, this has been absolutely fascinating. Thanks for guiding us through it.
My pleasure. It's rich territory.
And thank you out there for joining us on this deep dive.